Our goal is simple: to help you achieve the dream and vision you first had when you thought about starting a business. We're here to make growing your business less complicated. There are building blocks to build a sustainable business. We promise to seek them out and address them all. The Better Your Business Show starts now.
Good morning and welcome to the Better Your Business Show. Learn from our panel of industry experts as we teach you how to better your business. I'm Natalie Essman, financial strategist and your host. We have the professor of social media with us this morning, Mr. Todd Social.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. We love to be here, love the guests you're going to have on today, and excited to be able to share valuable information for all the listeners.
That's right. So whether you are joining us live or watching the replay, go to pillar5.com and take your free business assessment so we can address any questions or concerns that you have throughout the show.
Yes. And, we all know that you are always trying to better your business. And you may have blind spots, and you may have obstacles, and you may have challenges. But the goal is to really help you have some insight and foresight to how you can actually grow and understand the different components and aspects of your business.
Yes, that is right. So this morning we are going to be talking about let's make a deal. Whoop, whoop. I hope you have your costumes on because we are having Deal Maker in the house, Xavier Egan with us. I'm super excited about it. I learned so much. We had him on the show once before, and he just blew my mind. It was really funny because I had a friend of mine, and her daughter-in-law just posted that she's mid-20s. She just bought 2 vending machines and stuck them in locations. And so I messaged her. I was like, get it, girl, get it. I was so excited. And I just remember the first time we met Xavier thinking to myself, I wish I would have known you 20 years ago, what a different position I would be in today if I understood what it means to buy a business, to sell a business, to prepare myself that way, and to exit rich. So if we can bring him to the screen, Mr. Xavier Egan with Capital Asset Advisors here this morning. Xavier, I'm ready to make a deal.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Good morning. Happy to join you all.
All right. Good. So let's hear a little bit about you. How did you get into your industry? I'm really curious about that. How did you get into buying and selling businesses, teaching people how to exit rich?
Absolutely. Well, long story. I kind of worked in accounting and finance for a couple decades in corporate America, kind of small businesses to mid-size to, billion-dollar organizations. And at some point in time, I found that I was working for a company owned by a private equity group. And that's really what expanded my mind on really thinking about how buying and selling businesses can create extreme wealth, right? In the case of private equity. And then I actually bought a mergers and acquisition firm. And that's what ultimately cultivated Capital Asset Advisors and where we are today.
What is the biggest challenge that you've seen that business owners have in this capacity?
I would say really knowing how to create value, right? People really aren't very familiar with the idea of exiting, or successfully exiting. Statistically, only 20% of companies actually successfully transition their organization. So that means 80% of companies, whether they're 100 years old or 100 days old, may disappear over time, right? So really honing into, what that end game is, or, thinking with the end in mind is really something that people should be aware of.
When do most people start thinking about that?
Usually when it's too late, after they're, upset at the world or things aren't going perfectly, things of that nature. When in actuality, it's kind of what they say about sports. You want to go out when you're on the top, right? So instead of on the downtrodden or depressive side of your business, you really want to think more and more about how your exit strategy would work as you're growing your business, right? Because it's way more valuable to someone else on the incline than it is on the decline, right?
So let's talk about that because when I read about what you do, it says that you help them sell their business at maximum value, um, and exit their business with a hand selected buyer. So talk to me about that a little bit. Does it take like I think about retirement planning, right? Because I'm in finance. So in my regard, I'm helping people exit their job, right? So so how do you do that on a business component? Because my thoughts are typically people are so far behind, and we're talking about, their job, let alone their business. How do you get started in their process? How do you know how much to sell their business for? How do you come up with people that are interested in buying that type of business?
Sure. Well, I would say it's very similar to something people are familiar with, real estate, that in order to sell a house, you have to know what the value is, or even to sell a building, right? So typically that's the first step is to understand what your business valuation may be. And that's something that we can offer as a complimentary service up front. There's also some extensive versions of that if you needed it for insurance or buy sell agreements or otherwise. But really understanding what your value is today is going to be important as a growth step, right? To say, well, even if it's not where I want it to be or in the perfect place, if I know today where I stand, then it's a lot easier to build up to where I want to be tomorrow.
So usually when people are coming to see you, do they own multiple businesses? I'm just curious what kind of.
Well, sometimes, probably more often they own one business, maybe a side thing, something like that as well, and they're really focused on that main business, whatever it may be, whether that's construction or marketing or technology or otherwise. So they don't often have time to be that diverse unless they're a little bit fancier, more sophisticated, or kind of a bigger player. But our average everyday person, seeing as there's 30.3 million businesses in the States, 99.8% of them being small, and the most majority, 90% being 20 employees or less, it's really not, a game of always the most sophisticated crowd. It's really just everyday Americans, right? That are in a variety of positions and, sit in a variety of seats and say, hey, well, either I've never thought about exit or something's got me thinking about it, kind of help guide me towards the path.
Awesome. And then you just kind of reverse engineer from there.
Mhm.
So I know that you have joined the board with Pillar 5 I Do Systems.
Sure.
Talk to us a little bit about that. What made you to be part of this journey?
Well, sure. I think that it's important for businesses to have a village, right? To the same idea that they say about it takes a village to raise a child. I think the same when it comes to business aspects, that it's a lot more than just the visionary per se, or just the accountant, or just the lawyer. It takes a whole tribe of people from the inside all the way to the outside to really be successful, and all of those partnerships are really what creates the ecosystem of why businesses are able to create so much of the gross domestic product, or create so much value for their families or others. So I think that I Do Systems kind of helps as a part of that team, where of course helping companies understand where they're positioned financially, from a standpoint of what we do from a business valuation is obviously valid from an exit planning standpoint, but where are we positioned from a growth standpoint, or from a timing standpoint, or from a next level, where bankability or financeability, or risk tolerance or otherwise. I think there are a lot of questions to be asked about a business in order to make sure they're going into the successful route and staying in the place that they want to be. And I do systems is one of those support functions that's really trying to balance that out, right? And give them another tool in the shed to say, hey, we're headed the right direction and we know some steps to be successful.
Yeah. So how long does that process usually take when you sit down with the business owner from that first consultation with them,
Mhm.
and kind of putting that strategy together? How long does that process usually take? Let's just say, well, the whole thing, maybe you sit down, you evaluate my business. That's our first initial conversation. We
Sure.
decide, yes, this is going to work. And then how long does that process tend to take?
Sure. So I'd say usually we go with a two-step process to start the conversation, right? Although the value of a company is going to be most closely coordinated when it comes to the financeability, the tangible parts. The real value for the next owner is going to be the intangible parts that makes your business different from the next, or make it more usable or ease of use than the next. So usually, in order to understand how your business works, what those ins and outs are, and what the coordination day to day looks like, then we usually have a first conversation where we talk general discovery, right? Where your company lies, how it works, where you are, what the people look like, what kind of positioning you have available. And then we follow up, because usually we need a fact pattern for the valuation side, something like financials or otherwise. Then the second meeting is more focused on the tangible, right? Which is looking through coordinated financial details, and then applying kind of the standard apparatus to multiples, asset estimations, and things like that to come up with the total value of the company. So that's kind of the first, two steps, I would say, to getting to at least a choice position where a person can say, okay, well, I'm quite serious about the idea of potentially exiting my organization successfully. And now that you've told me what my value is, I want to go, right? Or it turns out the other hand, you know, I want 5 million as a value and it's only at 2.5 million a day. So that gets you to more of the talk of how do I create more value to get to that final destination that I'm looking for. And it gives you that parameter of mark to market of say, hey, where am I today? Right. So the next year I can decide, well, hey, am I progressing forward towards that goal and I'm at 3 million, or am I going backwards? Right. And I'm at, two and a quarter or something like that. So that's kind of how the general process would work if, there's a decision factor for sure, to really discern that you're really ready to exit that company. And of course, part of that decision is that the value that you're hoping for, you've already achieved, or a value that you're willing to accept, you're close enough to achieve.
And out of the businesses that you sit down with them, how many of them are really in position to do that, or have even planned it that way, as opposed to being forced to exit their business for, one reason or another?
I would say back to the statistics, only 20% of the companies exit successfully. That means 80% of companies, whether they're 100 years old or 100 days old, just disappear one day, right? So successful exit means that you transacted and transitioned to another party so that it could move forward. Now whether it was superior compensation, or filled your wildest dreams of making you wealthy, is another subject matter, right? But the success really comes in transition and keeping the operation going, because we all kind of started a business from a legacy standpoint that we really wanted this to go on beyond us, right? Uh, so most organizations aren't ready, right? Just truly, the value isn't there. Is most often what we find is the number one reason. Hey, I'm at 2.5 and I want to be 5 million. Let's talk more about the growth to get there. Uh, and then the other side is maybe we're not positioned to exit. And some of the value factors that are important to, say, another owner may not be something that was important to us as the way that we formatted our business. A good example might be that maybe I'm a hands on type of owner and I love to talk to my clientele base. So I don't have a number one salesperson. I'm the CEO, and I'm the guy who goes and talks to everybody in the field and services all the clients. And nobody knows the rest of the company; they know me. Well, from a transition standpoint, that's a huge risk for the next owner because they may not have the same je ne sais quoi that you had per se, right? Or the great personality, or uh, that I'd love to have a beer with you type of mentality. And because of that, that can be a detriment to that next owner. And that again could be a detriment to the value that you created, even if you have successfully created value for yourself, right? That it's paying your bills, it's taking care of your family and all of that. Well, it may not be set in position to be successfully succeeded to another person if we haven't thought about that and purposely planned and created that kind of environment.
It was funny because last time we had you on the show, you really just blew my mind and opened up this whole other world for me. So the next morning I had a doctor's appointment. I went to see my chiropractor. And so that was the first thing I asked him. And so I was like, what is your plan for exiting? How does this work for you? And he said essentially exactly what you just said. He said, in my industry, it's a little bit different because it's such a personal industry that a lot of times it doesn't work that way for me. And so I had asked him, well, how did you start your practice? He told me he bought 4 books of business, but it still wasn't the same. You still have to go in and build that relationship. So it's very interesting to kind of hear how this all goes together. I had 2 other questions that were really, really pressing for me. One was, is there a certain type of business that works better in your industry? We live in a world now where there's a lot of MLMs. There's, just all different types of way people are doing business. Is there a certain type of business that works best for you in that regard?
Okay. Well, no, I think that's the positive about the mergers and acquisition industry. Uh, Ideally, it compromises or consists of every business that exists to really make that true ecosystem, right? That's how the macroeconomics works for all of us. Is that we need a dry cleaner, we need a laundromat, we need a cleaning company, so on and so forth. All of them may be similar, but we still need all of them independently because the service for me may be different from the service for you, or my need may be alternate to your need. So, from a standpoint of how the business market works, there is no necessary bad company that exists. I mean, ultimately, there is for every company another person that's willing to take that on, whether it's an organization like a corporation or another business, or if it's another individual who just wants to lead this dynamic company and the charge forward. Usually there's something for every industry. Now, whether your company is set up in position for that transition is a little bit different, but can it be? Absolutely, right? Every company out there could be successfully positioned for succession. Now, of course, there's things that are super popular. If we were talking venture capital space or something like that, people hear a lot about technology companies as well, right? But from a day to day, anybody can kind of take advantage type of space is really everything from construction to marketing to staffing to insurance, wealth management, M&A, chiropractic, CPA, dental offices, anything you could think of. I think I did some research. There's one thing that we can't buy as a general practitioner, and that's just a law office. And they voted, I think, a couple years back, 2017, I think, and suggested that they still wanted to keep the idea that only a lawyer can buy a law practice, right? To make sure that they, kept integrity in the industry, right? That they couldn't be bought.
That's very interesting. Wow. Law. You can't
Yeah,
buy a law office. You can buy
that's it, right? But we can literally buy a hospital right now, and none of us be, people with medical professions or degrees, right? We can buy a dental practice or chiropractor or anything we wanted. So there really isn't a limit to how that transition works. it just goes back to people create their own limits on what those transition plans are.
Awesome. We're going to go into a quick break and we'll be right back with Xavier Egan with Capital Asset Advisors. We are talking this morning about making a deal. We'll be right back.
There are business owners who open a business, close a business, open a business, close a business, and repeats that cycle until one day they open a business that becomes successful, sustainable, and thriving. And that's proven. We could talk about many entrepreneurs that are very well known in the marketplace who tell you they've opened several businesses and closed several businesses in order to get where they are today. Because of the 2000 mantra that came in that you have to fail to succeed. And so in their mindset, I have to start a new company. I have to close it. I have to start another company. I have to. The key word here is I have to. And they don't. There's a choice. They could choose not to do that.
Chris's business was growing and quickly adding employees. The company was taking off. When the company grew to more than 25 people, Chris hardly had time to do anything but deal with annoying employee problems. Fortunately, Chris found the abundant tools to keep the team organized and motivated. Now, delegating is easy and the company can keep growing. If you manage or advise a company like this one, visit abundant.com to learn more.
And we are back with Xavier Egan with Capital Asset Advisors. This morning we are talking about making a deal, buying and selling your business. Welcome to the show, Xavier. So one of the questions that we had from our studio audience is, when should entrepreneurs begin with the end in mind, and how or who do they go to other than LegalZoom, etc.? That was for your dance intro. You didn't know that? That's part of me at the dance. That's your debut.
Okay, perfect. So they say when you go into a business, to start with a business plan, right? In a general construct. Say if you went to your SBA score office, they walk you through a concept and say, hey, let's write something up to figure out what we're going to do here. And in that, they would say, hey, you choose a market and get a percentage of that. And it's going to be so big that you should be successful. If you figure that out, then you're good to go, right? And then after that, in the back of that business plan, it says, begin with the end in mind. How will you exit, right? What's the end strategy? And most people just, simply breeze over that topic and say, hey, I'm going to sell it, right? Or I'm going to give it to my kid or something like that. 60% of business owners still believe the old school theory of succession planning, which is that there'll be a family lineage plan, right? Where I'm going to give it to, someone, the daughter, son, nephew, what have you. Today, that's only successful 15% of the time, right? And now there's a generational kind of dynamic or gap where nobody wants to do what their parents did, no matter how good it looked or bad or otherwise, or, wealthy or poor. Everybody believes that they can create their own path. So Junior doesn't even live in town anymore, right? He lives in a different city, a different state. And most of us are visuals to prove that, right? Including myself. So it's really difficult to say that the old school thought that I can leave it to my son or daughter is going to be a value proposition for them. So beginning with the end in mind in that business plan might say that we need to put a little bit more effort into that, right? With what does it look like to transition outside of that family succession? And looking into that usually is to talk to a business broker, depending on the size of your company, or M&A advisor, or investment banker, just kind of depending on the level. And of course, we can help guide you through whichever level you may be at. But talking to them and getting evaluation is usually a good start. Whether or not you're looking to exit at the time, having that third party opinion to give you kind of that market synopsis or market visual on what you're doing or what you perceive yourself to be doing could be a value add. And a lot of those guys, may go through question or Q&A kind of thing to tell you, hey, you're not in a position yet. Some of them will go through the valuation steps, and others will get you all the way to that point where maybe there's consultation or classes or things like that you can go to kind of get more familiarity with where you are. And that could be, a financial advisor, a business broker, or M&A advisor, all the way to your CPA, trying to give you some insight on, hey, there is more value to be created and had from your company, but you may need a professional to help you, guide yourself through that year over year, right?
I would think it's crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I would think it would be so important, especially dealing with hopefully such a large sum of money, right? I just can't imagine spending all that time going through my business and not paying attention. Now, at least for meeting you the first time, I don't know if I would have had this conversation a year ago, but I just can't imagine now. And I know even after our conversation, the first thing I did is I went back to my CPA and I changed our conversation. Can you talk a little bit about when you're valuing your business, why that's important instead of reverse engineering all the way back, right? Why is it important to show the value?
Yeah, so there's a terminology that exists called operating loss, right? And ultimately, it just means maximizing your tax positioning, right? And sometimes that can be having a negative bottom line, although you have a positive cash flow position. And depreciation is a good example of how that could work. You made 100,000, but you bought enough equipment that you could depreciate 100,000, right, or 150,000, and now you've lost 50,000 per se. When in actuality, you still have all that cash. So the operating loss is something that people, especially tax professionals, always or should most often advise for businesses to take advantage of, right? Because it's a savings mechanism as a part of how you apply the tax code, right? Not that I'm your tax professional. Please go get your own advice. But it is a tool to be used. However, when it comes to understanding the value of your company, people need to just understand or be able to discern the discretionary earnings that are had for your company. And what that means is from a seller standpoint or owner standpoint, there are benefits that you're able to take advantage of, right? The bottom line is a part of it, but you may have things that are already hidden inside the bottom line that you're taking advantage of, like salary per se, or leasing vehicles, or, you might even lease an apartment. I don't know how Natalie gets down, Uh, so there could be all sorts of discretionary things that are, again, discretionary expenses or earnings for this owner or fringe benefits that the next owner can ultimately choose if they take the cash home or if they apply it the same way. And it doesn't affect how much revenue is created in the company. So being able to see or spot those things out is going to be important. And sometimes when we talk with our tax professional, not only do we start with the operating loss, but then we also get into disguising expenses per se, in categorizations that may not make it easy for us to discern the difference between what's a discretionary earning for the owner and what may be a regular expense that's necessary for the business to operate. And an easy example might be people spending gas, on their cars or taking care of their vehicles, whether it's lease expense or just gassing them up all the time. Well, if you look at this business and it's not a business that correlates to delivery or transportation, then that gas could really be a freebie that the owner's taking advantage of. But if it is an organization where they're providing transportation or delivery or something like that, then it could be that the owner's just hiding his own gas in the middle of that melee. So understanding that discretionary earnings are okay and acceptable from a tax basis standpoint, but also important to be able to discreetly separate so that you can be able to provide the value for yourself, right? because ultimately, if the bank can't prove it or easily carve it out, then it doesn't exist. So it's hard for a buyer to create the value on that aspect, right? If I can't get finance for it, then ultimately I have to pay for it out of my pocket. And most deals are going to be leverage based at a certain level, as leverage buyout is kind of the biggest terminology for M&A in the globe. So if that's the case, then you really want to be in the best position to say, hey, every dollar or dime that I get to take advantage of, an old school version of it is that I show profitability on the bottom line. Unfortunately, that's going to cause a tax,
Yeah.
effect for me, right? So if I want to have the, positive tax effect, then it would be, hey, well, I want to listen to my CPA, but at the same time, I want to provide guidance and support on what my end goal is, right? That, hey, I may not want to go all the way to that discrete level that they suggest. Maybe I want to create another category, or I may want to box it out a little bit further to say, hey, I want to be able to point to that object and say, hey, no, that's me, right? And even if I called it owner's expenses, there's not necessarily a flaw to that from a tax basis standpoint. You could have regular cost of goods sold to say that's valid for the business, and then you could have owner's, truck costs kind of thing that isn't valid to the business, and both you get to write off, because in the tax form, they don't have a separate spot for, cool stuff that I get to take advantage of for myself versus the expenses I do for the business, right?
Yeah.
All of them involved together. So it's ultimately to your advantage to use your profit and loss statement, your own personal statements, to really discern these things. And that's where your CPA can help, where it's not changing the tax kind of positioning, but it's also creating the definition that you need to be visible.
So most companies, if not all, think revenue first, and revenue to outpace expenses, right?
Mhm.
So essentially, when you're talking to a company and helping them to understand like exit, whether it's through an acquisition, a merger, or something of that nature, is there a way for them to understand how valuable that they are, um, versus just creating more revenue to create more value? Because I think a lot of companies struggle in trying to find that.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of where the valuation process comes in handy. I think it's a little bit different from what people think of naturally as their intrinsic value, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm the owner of this company, and I count my value based on the people I touch, or the employees that I can afford, or
Yeah.
how many deliveries I make. All of these could be value metrics that are intrinsic and internal to the company that I use as markers to kind of get where I'm going. And albeit true that they are part of the big story, they aren't, kind of the same story, I would say, that the financeability or the valuation from a bankability standpoint is looking at. So that's where that third party comes in, right? To say, hey, let's start with the bottom line. Let's then get into what are our discretionary earnings, what are our add backs, as we call them in the industry. What are the assets that we may have? What is the market value for those things? Where are we positioned in the organization? How does the stability look? How's our customer concentration look? How's our management flow of organization look, right? If in fact I left the organization a day, or I left for a week, would it detrimentally, affect the company minorly, moderately, what have you, right? All of those are sensitivity variances of what creates value on top of those fact-based things that we talked about before on the discretionary earnings, right? That if a company is set up to where there's a, operational leader, which maybe I'm doing as the owner, and there's a second in command, and then there's a third in command, and there's squads of people out there doing their job, that's going to be a lot more valuable if it's versus a flat organization where it's me, leading all the dynamics and just people out there, in the streets, doing their own thing. because in the next owner's version, I have to be as dynamic as you, to create the success in the organization the same way as you, versus I'm looking for a business transaction, investment, right? And the true means of investment is that I'm not taking a gamble or risk, right? So I ultimately want something that's consistent, that I can continue to see the consistency that it's already created from the past. So having that management layer might be detrimental, right? Or super important, knowing that you're not the guy, the face of the videos and all of that kind of thing for all the customers might be important, or that you got somebody else in the company doing that, right? That you don't have one customer that loves you to death and everybody else is a minor customer in comparison. And if this one customer leaves, we're up, the creek without a paddle type of thing, right? So there's again, intrinsic value that I might create that says, hey, as a lifestyle company, which is a terminology that just translate that it's working well for my life. I'm doing great. My bills are paid. I got the car I want, the house, everybody's happy at the company. It's my lifestyle, right? But from an organizational and a structural standpoint, it's not prepared for any succession, right? It's not strategized for transition. And so that company would yield less value. Although across the street, they could be doing the exact same numbers as this guy because he's running it from a lifestyle standpoint and they put an organizational structure in place. They can transition and gain the value of the company, and he may not be able to, right? Someone may want the discount or may not want to take over it or take advantage. And that's kind of I would say, the flaw with people not planning in advance, that succession is a part of the strategy and that transition is a part of the strategy, so that we may need insight outside of the intrinsic value that we would want to create, right? Like, I want a business that's right for me. It's kind of how people start, right? They think about entrepreneurial activities as a freedom charge, like, I'm going to be out here doing what I want to do, owning my time, creating my space, creating this great mystical, island in the world that's mine.
Yeah.
And albeit that's true to a certain extent, that's not really what creates the value in the long run, right? Because an organization that's really customized specifically to you isn't valuable to anybody else.
Exactly. Is there any difference from one business broker to another, or do they typically all provide the same service?
Well, I'm going to say that Capital Asset Advisors provide the greatest service, quote unquote, in the world, right? And there is no other like us. All right. So there will be a degree, right? And really part of that just categorizes into, the value of your business. First off, to which types of organizations would be willing to deal with you. There are certain brokers who say, hey, if we have a phone Q&A conversation and you don't have this much revenue, catch me later, right? When you have it. There's others that will go through the, steps to help you understand where to get, right? So it really does kind of depend on the rhyme and rhythm to your organization and kind of the pace of what you're doing. Now, the general aspects of what a M&A advisor or broker might do absolutely is the same. The framework, they're going to hopefully help you take your business to market, whether that's in a public, discreet kind of context, or whether it's in a private, hand-to-hand kind of combat version of it. That's the job. Now, how good they do at that job, how much you appreciate their services, that's always going to, be a little bit unique towards the organization that you work with.
And I would think even the buyer reach would be my guess, right? The pool efficient of who's going to buy the business.
Yes.
I would assume that's something you kind of create over time as you're building your niche.
Yes. So there are some open market type of utilities, similar to Zillow when it comes to real estate from a residential standpoint. There's some other tools we could talk to commercial for businesses at a lower market standpoint. BizBuySell.com is an example of a marketplace where you could see businesses available every day that are transitioning and transacting, right? And so there is a way for any broker or any owner to theoretically just go direct, use the open market resources, and create access to buyers, right? So that is part of the tool set, I would say, that hopefully all of them would have access to. But then, with time, history, and effort, maybe some of them might be more specifically niche driven, where they have a historic context of owners or historic context of buyers that may be relevant to you already. And then others, we try to be industry agnostic. So we say, hey, we'll go figure that out for each industry, right? Or each particular business if necessary.
I'm impressed. Well, no, this is interesting though, because we really think about it and really breaking it down in context for a lot of businesses in different categories too. It might be better for them to be sourced more. Like if it's a tech business, it might be better for them to be instead of revenue driven to try to upsell their business and create valuation. It might be better for them to do a merger or acquisition. There might be better software that's out there to kind of merger and acquire. There might be firms that might be franchisable, but they don't know how to exit to that.
That's right.
What's interesting is that you give businesses a sense of where their strategy should go. It seems like they get a strategy or a plan to start, but then they don't think of exit, so they don't necessarily know what scale is for them, because everybody says scale is more revenue, and that's not necessarily true. So if you see a business kind of, I guess, in a mid-tier, kind of at a crossroads, how do you help them navigate whether it's exit to sell, exit to merger and acquire, or say, exit to, transition the business to someone else? What kind of traits or tactics do you look for that help you to decipher which kind of roadmap to take them to?
Sure. So, really, the truth about this is that that's a personal decision, right? For each individual owner. This is probably one of the most emotionally dynamic industries that exist out there. And the reason is because you would kind of correlate this to selling Granny's house, right? That we've had that much experience with it, right? We've been that close to it.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, statistically, we're a male-dominated society, women power, International Women's Month, though, right? Let's get more Natalie's out there.
That's right.
But we're male-dominated, so most organizations are going to be male-owned. Now, as you can imagine, that's a surprising dynamic to say it's emotional context, right? But if you can think about this, most of us, from a standpoint of business ownership, have spent more time with our organization than we spent with our families. We've grown this thing. We might have had it before we had that woman, tell you the truth, right? We might have grew it and had that organization before we had those kids. We might have had those relationships with those employees before we had relationships with some of our friends. And so building that context over time is something that is a lot more than money to say that it's time to transition. It's a lot more than just the value at that point, right? This is my family ultimately, right? This is something
It's their identity.
Yeah, this is my identity. And there's a whole series of transitioned counselors that would tell you that there's a big deal, right? To Natalie's point, the identity that's tied to that, and the routine availability or utility, the idea that, every morning I get up, I go to the office, I have my coffee with the boys, and, I go to lunch here and I do this and that. What's next is a concern just as much as how much value that I'm going to get out of this is a concern. So don't, take it that, of course, that we're focusing on the fact pattern right now as the largest utility point to organization, because in reality, as I said, they're not going to cry in front of me, right? But there may be a little, withdrawal from transition that people aren't expecting or aren't anticipating. And that goes back to planning that transition, and successful transition comes in a, dynamic way that money is a part of it, and setting your life up in a position, but also what's next, what am I going to do, is a part of it too. So to your more specific question, it could be based on the owner himself and what he feels and where his life is. Instead of saying, well, hey, I always imagined that I was going to have 5 million. I come in and say, well, shoot, you're at 6.5 million. You ready to go? Let's get some turkey, right? Let's cash in. They say, well, you know what? I'm really enjoying it right now. I'm excited and I'm still passionate about what I'm doing. So I'm not sure if I'm ready to cash in, if the money would mean anything, because I don't know what I'm going to do next. And then it becomes, well, hey, well, if it's not over, then you can make more money. You can create more value then, right? And how do you create more value? Well, because we've walked through your intangible and tangible means of value for your company, we may have, great tools like I do systems to refer you to, or banks for credit lines, or sales companies, or marketing companies, marketing professors, or whoever, to help you create more revenue, less expenses, or do both in that organization. Or the secondary, you're big and bad enough and really understand that you want to scale even more. And hey, if I made it to 6.5 in this time, maybe I want to double or quadruple. Well, now we're talking M&A at that point. Let's go acquire other organizations to where our footprint could be twice the size in one event, right? And now we learn more. We pick up extra attributes, better knowledge base, more understanding, more skill levels, because now we get that organization and all the utility that they provide in addition to their customer base and revenue, not just buying a book of business, kind of how we look at insurance sometimes, right? So there is a, strategy for each person, I would say, based on kind of where they feel they are in life. It could be that, hey, I'm 6.5 is great. I'm done with this thing. I've had my road here at this company. I love the industry at first, but I hate it now. Let me cash in. And what am I going to do next? Anything that doesn't involve this. All right. I'm going to buy another business that doesn't involve this. Okay. And I'm glad it went well, but I'm not trying to, roll the dice twice with them. So really that goes back to that emotional context that each owner has his own family and his own vision and, visual of what he would hope success really means for him, or how he would like to live out the remainder of his days. And that looks so different and so unique for all of us. Maybe that's cashing out and going to Denver and buying a house by the lake. I'm sure there's some great laws to say why you might want to do that. But there's another guy who says, hey, that's not his vibe, right? So understanding that is really that unique position where we're not the drivers of the strategy when it comes to which strategy we go. We're more the implementation experts of the strategy, right?
Do you want to get that, Todd?
Are there any questions that an entrepreneur should ask themselves, or answers that should have regarding their company before reaching out to a business broker?
Yeah. Do I make any money? That's important, right? You do want to have some growth so that, this guy isn't feeling like he wasted his drive or talk with you, right? Some positioning level. So you don't want to start, day one, week one, like, hey, let's talk to the broker, because there's really no details for him to discern kind of that scenario based off of, right? So usually the value marker for them is going to be per year added into the organization, because they're going to need a full year financials or full year tax statements or multiple years of tax statements as a best case scenario, because ultimately, from a bankability standpoint, you're going to need at least 2 to 3 years worth of consistent, tax files or production to say that, hey, I believe that financing this company is a sound decision, right? So it's not something that, hey, week one, day one, I could knock it out the park and check off my list. Let's go call a M&A advisor and have that chat. But it is something once you get to, past year one and year two, year three, that, every year from then on, it's something that, hey, a good annual checkup is how I call it. Again, male dominated. So I always say, hey, it's like going to your annual checkup. You may not want to go, but you're pretty satisfied by getting the results, right? Like that, you're not dying, hopefully. So
Yeah.
if you get the results, that you're looking for, you're good to go. Now, if it doesn't say your business is trash or you can't sell it today, that's perfectly fine, because it's not going to tell you anything negative. If anything, it's going to give you upsides to what you can do from a strategy standpoint of how to add more value. But having more than 1 year worth of history is probably going to be that starting point.
Which to me is exciting. I never understand why people don't want to get back together after a year. Cause like, don't you want to see the growth? I'm like, show me the money. I want to see it. Right. And then what can we do to even, I'm assuming there's always going to be a little bit of room to shift. We're going to always have to shift a little bit during that process. To me, that's just exciting to say, okay, we did this. Let's see what we did. Now, how can we make it even better going into this next year, this next quarter? So
Absolutely. And some might even say, hey, when you get to that valuation, you might spot things out like, hey, that was more profitable than I thought, or, that looks to be too many expenses in that category. Why should I be doing that? So it could be a helpful exercise of utility to have those conversations with some third party, right? That doesn't have any benefit, to writing it down a certain way, right? Because in the broker's case, we want the best fact pattern possible, right? If we can prove the value of your organization off of details and facts, then more likely we can achieve full price for whatever we put on the market. So it's in our best favor to say, hey, that is validated. Like, we know where that number comes from. We can prove that they've been that successful and that they have this customer base and so on and so forth, right? Not kind of that mythical growth standpoint where we're thinking more venture capital, where it's about what could happen in the future, right? When it comes to acquisition or succession planning, it's about the tangible, what is actually here today, and then secondarily, what I could visual tomorrow.
how does someone reach your company, Xavier?
Well, happily, capitalassetadvisors.net, .co.biz. A lot of those get to us directly. We're on most social media aspects. You can always find me, Xavier Egan, at LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to run me down, or our phone number, 817-391-1475. Email address, Xavier@capitalassetadvisors.net. Any of the above work?
Do you have a preferred method of communication?
No, all of the above work. Of course, email is probably the most trustworthy.
There you go. Awesome. We're going to wrap it up. But my last question that I have for you is, I have decided I want to buy a business, right? I'm graduating from college. I want to buy a business. What do I do?
Excellent. So you decide that you have cash to do it, right? And how do you figure that out? Well, it's a leverage system, right? So the bottom out is SBA charges or requires 10% down payment. So that'd be the minimum amount of skin in the game that you'd have to have available for whatever the size of business is. Probably the high could be 30%. I would say you're buying in if you have to pay that much. So most often it comes somewhere between 10 and 20%. So I always give the example, 100,000 as a number that's accomplishable for most. 100,000 is a 10% down payment on $1 million company, or it's a 20% down payment on a $500,000 company. The difference in a $500,000 versus $1 million, I would expect in a $500,000 company, I'm looking for maybe 150,000 in cash flow that's available to me as the new owner or more. And in maybe $1 million business, I'm looking at over 300,000 in cash flow that I'm looking for the owner to have or more. So there's a good range of deviation, which just goes back to, from a buying cash flow standpoint, is if I have the capital from a down payment construct, I can ultimately choose how much cash I want to make every year and find a company to meet that dynamic, right? In the most simplistic format.
Which is so attractive, I think. But, it kind of irritates me a little bit because I think of how many businesses I could have invested in by now.
It is
but
a
I mean,
different
how
strategy.
many people really know, hey, 10% you can buy a business that's going to be positive cash flow right now. And hopefully, if everything's set up correctly, all the processes, systems are in place for you to come in, take it over. The system is running itself, hopefully, and then you're just off to buying and selling your next business.
That's right. And it's not just you, Natalie. 85% of people who buy businesses, probably at this lower market level, are first-time business acquirers, right? Now, whether they've been in business for decades or, not at all, it's their first time acquiring a business. And that's because it's seemingly something that people believe is outside of their range or realm. And as we just talked about, that's not necessarily true, right? As a down payment leverage scenario, probably any one of us who've had a successful business at some point in time could have participated by expanding our business through acquisition of other companies, right? Using the cash flow that we had and a little bit of leverage. But most of us just don't realize that that's an option. We continue that startup dynamic and, creationism path. Versus realizing that the number one growth strategy globally is mergers and acquisition, for that very reason, that they realize buying cash flow is a great opportunity.
Yes, I love it. Awesome. So Xavier Egan, Capital Asset Advisors, thank you for joining us this morning. You can find him on any social media platform. Thank you for being here. Go buy a business, right? All right. Mr. Todd Social, let's wrap it up. Any big takeaways from this morning?
I think the biggest takeaway is that if you're really thinking about your business in terms of strategy, you really want to think about the end game. You really want to take the steps to really see that out. And even if someone's like doing basic business planning, and a lot of people don't necessarily do this now, but should really look into it. Look at your business plan at your 5th year, as well as what you want to do in the beginning, because everybody wants to generate revenue. Everybody wants to market. Everybody wants to exit rich, but do you really know where you're at? I like what he said about your yearly checkup after year 2, year 3. I think that's an important thing, because in 2 or 3 years, you may not be so much in love with your business as you are in the beginning. When you're dating your business and you're trying to build the elements to it. And
you've gone through some stuff by then too.
You've gone through some stuff, and you've gotten I like it, but I don't love it, right? So it may be a way for you to kind of reinforce what is your direction. So I really like that, and I think that's a missing element to strategy for a lot of businesses. So it was a good show to really understand what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, every time we speak to Xavier, I just want to go buy a business so bad. I can't even, I think last time I was up for 3 nights looking on that buy, biz, sell, and studying all these different types of businesses. Because, you hear him talk about it and it just seems so easy. And again, it just seems like it's something we should be talking about, right? We're going to graduate school. We're buying houses. Forget buying the house. I want to buy a business, right? Let's talk about buying a business. So grateful for him to be here this morning and talk to us more about that. So thank you to iDo Systems for sponsoring today's show. Friday mornings, Todd, do you want to hit on Friday morning at Clubhouse?
Yeah. So Friday morning at Clubhouse, for those people who are serious entrepreneurs and really want to take their business to the next level, we'll be doing Clubhouse Friday mornings to really talk about serious entrepreneurship, talk about the systems, the tools, the tactics, and the way to actually really grow your business. This is something that's important to the esoteric central mindset of someone who has the next step level in their heads. And essentially, if you really want to know what entrepreneurship is really like, come check us out on Friday on Clubhouse, Serious Entrepreneurs Club.
That's right. Friday mornings. Thank you to ID Systems for today's sponsorship. Do something today that will help you better your business. We will see you next Monday, everyone. Have a beautiful week. We'll see you soon. Thank you for being here.
Our goal is simple: to help you achieve the dream and vision you first had when you thought about starting a business. We're here to make growing your business less complicated. There are building blocks to build a sustainable business. We promise to seek them out and address them all. The Better Your Business Show starts